Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Charles C.W. Cook, senior writer at National Review. He has his own podcast, the Charles C.W. Cook Podcast. He is also on the editors. Charles, I want to run down political violence categories with you, but before that, I want to talk about Brendan Carr, because I'm in a small group of people, you're on the other side, who think Carr was doing his job. But you know the Constitution, so I want to walk through my argument and have you critique it. Constitution gives Article 1 the authority to make laws. They made the Communications Act of 1934. The regulations and rules are under it. They're elaborate. I've lived under them for 35 years. We're on an FCC-regulated broadcast right now. If you use one of the 7 words, it costs me $1,000 per outlet that it's heard over. I also have to operate in the public interest. Carr has a job to do. He made his opinion known. It was public. He got jumped all over for doing his job. Do we want regulators not to do their job because we don't like their job?
Well, I think there's 2 issues here. One is the question of whether or not the FCC has that authority, which it does, although there are limits. The second question is whether or not it should be exercised in this manner, and usually is exercised in this manner. Now, the example you just gave, which is of profanity, those rules are enforced and have been for a long time. But clearly the FCC is not cracking down on people who lie on television over FCC organized bandwidth. That's just not a rule that is habitually enforced. And if it is enforced, it's done capriciously. So my objection here, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you, that what happened here was the response to the FCC. But if it was, I don't want that sort of capricious enforcement of political views.
Okay, I'll follow up with this. There was no enforcement because the commission, it requires 3 votes out of 5. It's 1 commissioner. And if, in fact, they took an action, that action would be subject to viewpoint discrimination, conduct discrimination rules, probably would be unconstitutional. Nevertheless, he was public about it as opposed to the White House staffers during the Biden years who would quietly call up Twitter or Meta and censor people. I'd rather have our regulators telling us what they think.
I completely agree with that. And I do think that it's a real shame, I use that word in both senses, that we subsequently got this admission from YouTube, which is owned by Google, that it had been kicking people off the monetized platform as a result of their speech, and no one seemed to care. So if you're asking me whether I think that progressives actually care about this sort of thing, no, I don't. Yeah.
All right, good. Now I want to, I've done about 2.5 hours last night trying to find every act of violence that could conceivably be considered political since Donald Trump was elected president. And I'd like you to give me your opinion whether it's left-wing violence, right-wing violence, Islamist violence, or in the category of insanity-driven violence. And I'm going to go in reverse order. The attack on ICE this week in Dallas.
Seems to have been left-wing violence. Could be some insanity. We'll see.
How about the other 2 attacks on ICE in August and July?
That seems to be left-wing violence.
The attack on the ABC affiliate in Sacramento with the rifle and by the California Teachers Association former lobbyist.
Seems to be left-wing violence.
The attacks on memorials of Charlie Kirk, some dust-ups with his supporters, and it's not violence, but the general internet reaction. Is it left-wing or is it insanity?
There's probably a bit of both, but there's a lot of left-wing violence there. And in terms of the speech, there's a lot of left-wing justifications for violence.
The bombing or attempted bombing of a Fox News van 2 days after Charlie's murder.
I don't know enough about that one, to be honest with you. It's either left-wing violence or insanity.
It might be Islamist violence. That's the counter-narrative that's out there. The assassination of Charlie, I think you'll agree with me, left-wing violence. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
But,
the murder of the Catholic kids.
Clearest case.
Very. The murder of the Catholic kids in Minnesota.
That one I really think could go either way. I mean, certainly his politics were leftist. There's no point in the press lying about that as they have. But there was a lot of evidence there that he was completely crazy. And I wouldn't want to ascribe that one to being political.
How about the murder of Melissa and Mark Hortman in Minnesota, the former speaker?
Yeah, that guy was crazy. This is an
Yep.
annoying one because people have rewritten it. That guy was just obviously crazy. He said Tim Walz had ordered him to do it. Of course he didn't.
You see, he had been a pro-life activist in Africa, so the narrative was easy. I'm going to continue with my list with Charlie during the break. We'll come back afterwards. Don't forget to come back because we're going to wrap it up and get some conclusions out of this right after this. I'm back with Charles C.W. Cook. You can follow him on X at Charles C.W. Cook. And of course, his podcast is his name. Charles, the murder of the two employees of the Israeli embassy at a reception at the Jewish Museum in May of this year.
Yeah, that seems to have been left-wing violence.
Could it be Islamist?
Not that I've read, but I'm open to being corrected.
Okay, I think it's left-wing violence too, but I'm just telling people we're aware of it. The murder of Brian Thompson, healthcare executive in New York in December.
Yeah, I mean, that was left-wing political violence.
Now, the attacks on Tesla dealerships, including the arson.
Well, it's hard to know with that because it could either be left-wing violence or people who are crazy who've picked up on the news. But it certainly wasn't right-wing violence.
It wasn't right. Okay. Both attempts to kill President Trump and, of course, the murder of Corey Compatore in the course of one of those. Left-wing insanity.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about the guy in Butler. I think it's an extraordinary thing that that disappeared so quickly and that we know so little about the guy who did it. The other case in Florida, I think the guy was just convicted and tried to stab himself in the courtroom. I would say that's a combination of the two. He had left-wing views and was motivated, but he also seems to have been crazy.
I agree. Anti-Semitic violence on campuses from Los Angeles, UCLA to Columbia.
That's left-wing violence, and that's the scariest of all to me in one sense, in that those people are open about their views and the consequences of them. They're not crazy and they're not stupid. They're educated and they believe what they're doing is necessary.
And I'm putting that in one category. There are at least a dozen events that fit under that. The murder of the kids at the Nashville Christian School in March of 2023.
Again, it's difficult to know the state of the mind of the person who did it. That perpetrator had left-wing views, but I don't know if they were crazy too. They often are.
The attempt to kill Justice Kavanaugh or kidnap him in 2022.
It seems like a left-wing violence case, and the more evidence that comes out, the more it seems as if that was political violence in the sense that it was designed to create a different political outcome, in this case, preventing the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, he might have been nuts, but he had a plan and it was political. The plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. Now, people are uneasy about this because some of the people were acquitted, but some of the people were convicted.
Yeah, that seems like right-wing violence to me.
August 17th, the Charlottesville Tiki Torch Parade. Heather was mowed down by a neo-Nazi and killed. Right-wing violence?
Yes, definitely right-wing violence.
And I'm coming right back with Charlie on the network. Don't go anywhere. We only have 3 or 4 more. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Charles C.W. Cook is my guest. We're running through the very long list of violence in America that might be political since President Trump was first elected. June 14th, 2017, congressional baseball practice shooting. Charlie.
I think the guy was quite crazy, but equally his motivations were evidently political. So that is left-wing violence committed by someone who was unhinged.
Yeah. Now, I have not included, because it's so obvious, the January 6th, 2021 Capitol riot. That is right-wing violence, and a lot of people went to jail. It's one incident, but it's many instances of right-wing violence. Finally, I want to ask you about Antifa. Antifa created violence in D.C. on the day that Trump was first inaugurated. There was violence in Portland this week. How do you classify Antifa?
Well, I think that's the ultimate case of left-wing violence because that can't be ascribed to madness. There are a lot of people who are crazy, who pick up politics or hear people being hyperbolic and act on it. But with Antifa, that is more like the anti-Semitic violence we've seen on campus, which is that they really truly believe it, that they are political actors.
So I went through this exercise after reading George Packer in The Atlantic, who seemed to write at great length to avoid the obvious conclusion that the vast majority of violence in the United States since Trump was elected has been left-wing political violence tinged with insanity. And I don't think it's close. January 6th got a lot of attention, but it's not close. Do you agree with my assessment?
I do, and I think it's interesting that when people make the counter argument, they have to go back quite a long time. I mean, you can, debate it, but Timothy McVeigh in 1995 was a right winger in some ways. He certainly was in his own head. But that was 30 years ago, and what you've just described, at the very least, is a trend. The trend over the last 10 years has been far more on the left than on the right.
So where do you think it takes us, Charles Cook? And what should the FBI stand up COINTELPRO again, but this time respect constitutional rights so Bill Ayers doesn't walk free? What do you think we should do?
Well, I do think it's difficult. We've always had some violence in our country, unfortunately, and we have a First Amendment which limits the government in ways that it wouldn't in, say, Britain. But we've also had a government that was able to investigate and infiltrate. If you go back to the Klan, the government infiltrated that. We had neo-Nazi groups in the hills of Coeur d'Alene in the 1990s who were infiltrated. So the first step is to investigate and see if there is any organization, which is a separate thing, and the media's playing with this cynically, which is a separate thing from being of a particular ideology. It's different to say this person was left-wing than to say he's a member of a group that has a headquarters and orchestrates attacks in a coherent way. So we need to find out which is which, and then we'll deal with the problems.
I think we also have to deal with the internet and not via the government. That's pretty hard to do, but it does seem to me that a lot of young men are being drawn into this. Now, if I can switch to James Comey, I usually farm out my opinions on criminal matters to Andy McCarthy, and I'm going to do so again. He does not think this case is very strong. What do you think?
Well, you've got two people on this show, Hugh, who are farming out their legal opinion to Andy McCarthy. But I was persuaded by that piece as well. I think it is really weak. It seems that it only just about got through. One of the items presented to the grand jury was rejected. Andy's gone so far as to say he thinks it's possible that this will be dismissed pre-trial, and then he discusses whether or not that's good or bad for the country. But this is clutching at straws. I have no brief for James Comey. I don't like the guy at all. I think he's a preening fraud. I also think Donald Trump was unfairly targeted over and over again at both the state and the federal level. But that doesn't make this case warranted, and it doesn't make it strong.
Now, he did make the testimony. I went back and read over the testimony after I read Andy. I don't think it's as dispositively not perjury as Andy makes. The False Statement Act is big. There have been thousands of charges of the False Statement Act. Is there any downside to pursuing it to a jury and letting a jury exonerate him?
Well, it depends what you mean by downside. I mean, if you think that it's pretextual, as I do, then the downside is that the jury will acquit him because we don't ask them to look what they think on balance. We ask them to presume innocence. And I think I read Andy's case as being that what they are alleging here is going to be very, very difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the jury isn't going to do it. So the downside for the Trump administration is Comey then walks away and says, this was politically motivated, it was weak, and I've been exonerated.
Yep. Last question. I was thinking about this after I did my list last night. Is Donald Trump significantly more hated than George W. Bush during the height of the war and than Ronald Reagan during the height of the deployment of the Pershing IIs and the cruise missiles in Europe?
I think he is in some senses and isn't in others. I do think a lot of the Donald Trump hatred that we're seeing comes from institutions rather than people on the street who just don't seem as bothered. I do think, though, that the institutional hatred of him exceeds that of Bush, in part because the Iraq War was supported by a lot of people on the center left. And while Reagan was disdained, there wasn't the sense that he had destroyed everything that the media, for example, held dear. So I think it's of a different kind.
When Mitt Romney ran, he was attacked as by Joe Biden wanting to put people back in chains, and the 49% comment or the 48%, was that different in kind as well?
I think that was a precursor to this. I mean, obviously, the feeling wasn't quite as strong as it has been against Trump, but people will say that's why you got Trump. And there's some truth to that. When milquetoast Mitt Romney's treated like that, you can sense two things. One, the next guy isn't going to be as nice. Two, something substantive has changed on the left among those who are criticizing him. And I think that's what Republican primary voters sensed.
And I think that's right. And I think the left is deep into Alinsky land. 30 seconds. Do you think there's any saving the Democratic Party from itself?
I think the Democratic Party is going to have to lose 2 or 3 elections in a row before it reforms. And I'm not sure that that's going to happen in a country as divided as we are, and in a country where the economy moves around and people tend to vote on its vicissitudes.
Charles C.W. Cook, always good to talk to you. Listen to his podcast. That's under his name, Charles C.W. Cook. Listen to the editors from National Review. And, of course, follow Charlie on X at Charles C.W. Cook. I'll be right back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Stay tuned.